was very notoriously shot upon his departure from Parliament. He was sitting in his car and was shot 8 times, had to flee the country and receive care in Europe, where he lived for 3 years to recover. He came back to Tanzania in the hopes of fostering further democratic change. But on his return, he continued to face death threats. He had to leave again. President Magufuli died in office. Potentially of heart problems. There's a lot of kind of speculation about his passing, but he died. And the current president came to power, had been his vice president and came to power. So she ran for her first election in October of 2025. She was running as an incumbent because she had a seat when Magufuli had died, but this was her first time presenting for office. And really starting in 2024, you saw this incredibly disturbing uptick of some of the trends that we've talked about in the region. Disappearances documented up to 200 disappearances. Tundulisu, the opposition parliamentarian whom I mentioned, who was at that time the chairman of the leading opposition party, was charged with treason. He was put in jail. He remained in jail throughout the election and is indeed still in jail today. The other kind of leading opposition prospect was also barred from the election over the illusion that the government is the parent to the people, that the government will take care of the people. When you see the kind of violence that you saw, both in the run-up to the election and then after the election, there were 6 days of really very extraordinary violence, allegations of up to thousands dying. You saw a tearing away of some of that, the mythology around the ruling party and the idea that the government's, of what the government's responsibility is. Another trend that I saw that was extremely troubling when I look at Tanzania, but is highly relevant to the whole panel, is what they call transnational repression of activists across borders. So in the case of Tanzania, this opposition parliamentarian who had been jailed, Tundulisu, was supported by Ugandan and Kenyan activists who came to Tanzania to attend a hearing, to attend his trial, or that was their aspiration. What they have alleged publicly in press conferences, you can find this online, is that they were detained while they were in their hotel rooms, they were abducted and really horrifically abused before they were eventually able to return to their countries of origin. That kind of transnational oppression on activists it has happened in Africa for a long time, but I think it's rising in a new way in East Africa. And for those of us who support democracy and human rights in East Africa and on the continent, that transnational repression offers a unique threat. Because it means people are no longer safe if they cross a border. They can no longer find refuge or a place to recover in a neighboring country, or it might be much more difficult for them to do so. So as I think about how does the international community respond, I'll mention one other threat. We talked about impunity, this shutting down of the internet during electoral periods. I know both speakers have talked about that, but that really is something that has an enormous impact because it means that we don't get the stories and the documentation out to the rest of the world to support accountability. So when I think about how do the players on the ground and how does the international community help respond to some of these troubling trends? First, I would say that, again, thinking primarily about Tanzania, we saw a few glimmers in terms of the international response, and particularly the African response immediately after the election. The Southern African Development Community, which is the regional body Tanzania is a member, did say that in most areas, voters could not express their democratic will. That may not sound radical to the folks in this room, but within the African context, for that to be part of SADC's official statement was actually a very strong position. Similarly, the African Union called out the objections, said that they called into question the legitimacies of the election. So you saw the beginning of a response from African counterparts. I think that we don't want to skip over that. Those language statements are not easily won in the world of diplomacy, and I want to make sure that we remain focused on it. Even the United States, which was not particularly vocal around the time of the election itself, did announce in December of 2025 that it would be re-examining the bilateral relationship based in part on disturbing violence against civilians in the days leading up to and following Tanzania's October 29 elections. So you do see this kind of a little bit of an international recognition, and I think those of us who want to support democracy want to continue to foster those international acknowledgments when there are abuses. But I also think we need to lean into the regional space. We need to think through how can we support regional actors to support one another. Because there are many things that from this far vantage point of Washington we will not see or know. And so thinking how can we foster and both the collaboration and highlight the particular threat of transnational repression as a way to try to support democratic actors in East Africa. So I have a little bit more to say about Tanzania, but truly I want to leave time for our very excellent panelists. And of course, for Bobby Wine, very, very pleased to have you join us today. So I'll hold there. Happy to take questions at the time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor Paltrow. And next up, we have Devin. So just going to get the mic back. And then after that, we'll proceed with Mr. Keda, who is on the screen behind me, and then ultimately with Mr.
Okay, I'm going to talk about Ethiopia and Somalia, but I'm going to really oversimplify things and try to be very quick so that we can move on to the very exciting things we're talking about. So I'm going to, like I said, really oversimplify what's a very complex Somali election. So there are 57 registered political parties that are going to compete in Somalia's upcoming election. There's also a lot of uncertainty with this election. So we don't have clarity on dates. We don't even have clarity on how the election is going to be conducted. And in fact, it's quite contested. This uncertainty is not doing anything to ameliorate tensions between the federal government and the federal member states. The main source of tension lies in whether Somalia is going to switch to a universal suffrage, as in direct elections where every is one person, one vote system, or if they're going to stay with the system that they've had until recently, where it's an indirect election. So the main issues at stake. First, everybody wants universal suffrage. So there was a recent kind of trial local election, and people in Mogadishu came out in force. So everybody would show that they really want to vote. On the other hand, there's fear that Al-Shabaab would target, they would take advantage of people being out in mass to vote, and they would use that as an opportunity to conduct additional attacks. To be fair, Al-Shabaab has targeted elections even when they were conducted indirectly, but I think the consensus is generally that this would give them greater opportunities. And then another point of contention with this is that right now the federal member states have a lot of influence in how the elections go. So if it becomes a direct election that's managed by the national government, then that influence is going to go down. So for example, earlier this week, Southwest State actually felt so threatened about the switch to a different electoral system, that they went ahead and they started holding their own indirect elections, and they cut ties with the federal government because they do see it as kind of an existential threat. Now, in that state, the president is viewed as someone who gets support from Ethiopia, so that can also be a part of the equation. Another major issue here is just feasibility issues. It takes a lot of work to conduct an election anywhere, but in a country like Somalia where, okay, just to give you an example, the recent local elections that they had in Mogadishu took 10,000 soldiers to provide security. So right now, the SNA has not been getting the same level of support from the United States or other partners. In fact, since January, U.S. assistance to Somalia was turned off. So, can they provide that security? That is a good question. And then there are also a lot of accusations that this is a power grab by the incumbent, right? So, Somalia has had 5 changes of leader and party in the last 5 cycles. So they're doing good at kind of making that power shift from one party to another. Maybe other countries in the region should take note. But at the same time, HSM wants to extend his time in office. He wants to change the constitution. He wants to, he got parliament to support a measure to give him another year. And he's hoping that the direct elections are going to be more feasible in urban areas where he has more support. So, there's a lot of tension over this issue, and the conclusion is unless the federal government can come to some compromise with the federal member states, because it's not just Southwest State, right? Puntland and Jubaland are also quite not happy about this. Then we're really in for a fear ahead in Somalia. So I think I'm gonna move over to Ethiopia really quick. This is gonna be the first time Ethiopia, June 1st, they're gonna have national elections, parliamentary elections. It's the first national election since the end of the Tigray War. How competitive are they? There are 23 opposition parties registered, and they are forming some coalitions, which could be a good sign. However, only in 2005 did the opposition in Ethiopia ever get close to having a decent percentage of the vote. And so some have said that this is not at all a democracy, this is procedural authoritarianism, because the choice has really been eroded way ahead of the vote. Let's see here, so just really quick. Of course, a point of contention is that the TPLF lost its status as a political party last year. Also, some parties are calling for a delay in the election. So, of course, thinking back to what sparked the conflict in 2021, it was the delay in the presidential elections that kind of led down a dangerous path. So we want to be careful there. Security is also a major issue for holding Ethiopian elections. So even last time, almost 100 voting districts weren't able to have voting. So this year it could be worse. This time it could be worse. They're trying to do something about it. They have a system where they show if it's green, then they can have elections. If it's yellow, then they have to proceed with caution, etc. But again, that's disenfranchising huge segments of the population. And Prime Minister Abiy isn't helping. So I'm sure as this expert audience is aware, he's curtailed media freedom, civic space, and political pluralism. He's passed a number, with Parliament, passed a number of laws that have taken media oversight and civil society oversight to political appointees that he controls. And then we've also seen the banning of a number of civil society organizations. So, with that speedy coverage of Ethiopian Somalia, I'm not going to turn out.
All right, thank you so much for this. Mr. Cato, if you would like to take it away.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm honored to be on this panel and happy to see a couple of familiar faces in the audience actually. So at the Human Rights Foundation, we recently released a new global monitor of the state of authoritarianism around the world. We call it the Tyranny Tracker. And according to our research, 3/4 of the world lives under authoritarian regimes. And this is reflected in the Africa region, where 91% of people live in countries under authoritarian rules. So the East Africa region is a reflection of that, and I was very glad that Elizabeth, for instance, mentioned the problem, the crisis of transnational repression, which has gotten worse and worse. And I have been asked to speak about Rwanda, and I will speak about Rwanda because it's a country that is very often left out of the conversation when it comes to East Africa and human rights in East Africa. But it's a country that's very relevant because it's always been ahead in terms of its authoritarian progression. And as I recently even heard from a Rwandan activist, the fear is that countries like Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya may be heading where Rwanda has been for years now. And so in the case of Rwanda, it's a fully authoritarian regime where President Kagame has maintained an absolute grip on power through constitutional manipulation, sham elections, repression. It's a country where main opponents, the main opposition leaders, have been unable, for years, have been denied the ability to register their political parties. They have been denied the right to run in elections, and they have been permanently barred from leaving the country. And I'm speaking specifically of Victoire Ingabire and Diane Rwigara, the two women who bravely attempted to run for president in Rwanda and were severely persecuted, jailed by the government. And in fact, since 2003, since Rwanda started holding election, the ruling Rwandan Patriotic Front has staged elections that have neither been free nor fair, nor remotely competitive. And these elections have always occurred with President Kagame's most serious political opponents either in jail or denied from running, barred from the ballot. And as a result, these elections have always resulted in coronation of President Kagame, who has consistently claimed 90+% of the vote in each of the elections, which is where Tanzania landed a few months ago. And Rwanda held its election in 2024. That election followed the same pattern, where we saw a crackdown on dissenters and journalists. Several YouTubers have been jailed and are still in jail today. Journalists, prominent investigative journalist John Williams Twali died a suspicious death. What is notable is that many of the critics of the government are Tutsi genocide survivors, which is the very constituency from which the Rwandan government gained its international legitimacy, the constituency for which it claims to speak for. Now, the two main opponents again, Ingabire and Rwigara, were denied the ability to run in the election, and President Kagame ended up running against the weakest possible opponent, Frank Habineza, and the president claimed 99% of the votes. Now, since then, the latest wave of repression has centered around Victoire Ingabire. She was previously jailed for 8 years on trumped-up charges. When she attempted to run for president in 2010, she was rearrested last July on another politically motivated case that involves the imprisonment of 8 of her supporters since 2021. These supporters were arrested for seeking training, seeking to participate in a workshop about nonviolent civil resistance. Basically, they were reading a book by Sajda Popovic, the Serbian activist, about nonviolent resistance. And that's the basis of their trial right now. So Ingabire was rearrested, and they're now, it's a politically motivated trial, a show trial, another show trial in Rwanda. And she had, meanwhile, for Ingabire personally, she has not seen her husband in over a decade, since 2010, because she is barred from leaving the country. And at this point, obviously, the country has been under a authoritarian consolidation for so many years, closed civic space. Critics, activists continue to flee the country, and they end up in Kenya and Uganda, countries which have traditionally served as their first point of escape from the country. And obviously Kenya is becoming unsafe. Uganda is relatively, has not been so unsafe for Rwandan activists, but we know that there is a resurgence of transnational repression, as was stated earlier. But regionally, Rwanda is a mentor in authoritarianism in the region. The government has managed to build this deceptive image of itself as a benevolent dictatorship. In some corners, there's even some people that believe that the current system in Rwanda is out of a consensus, which is absolutely not true. But it has so successfully marketed itself as an example of development under an authoritarian model that it's very often left out of the conversation. But the truth of the matter is, it remains one of the poorest countries in the world. It is definitely one of the most aid-dependent countries in the world. It's highly susceptible to international pressure. The country was recently sanctioned by the U.S., not for human rights, but for its fueling of war and instability in the neighboring DRC. And the impact of those sanctions is already being felt and by the government. But I think what is important here is to remember that even though the civil society is not able to operate on the ground in the country, in Rwanda, and that alternative voices are systematically silenced or forced into exile, that there is still a movement of activists, a movement of human rights defenders who are outside the country, who are very active, who are trying to organize. And many of them feel isolated. They do not have much contact with the activists from Uganda or Tanzania or Kenya. And there is a definite need for them to be in those networks, to be involved, to be heard, and to also for the community, the East African community and people in the neighboring countries to hear the cries of the Rwandans, which are being muted by the government, and to go beyond the facade of this country that appears to be developed but is not. That appears to be united and reconciled, but is not. This country that appears to be a successful example of reconciliation, but while it's in fact an example of negative peace. And the constant pattern of repression that goes well beyond the country's borders. As you know, Rwanda's transnational repression is exceptional in Africa and even in the world in terms of its global reach and its scale. And Rwandan dissidents and refugees, there's a lot of Rwandan refugees that live in Tanzania, in Uganda, and in Kenya. These are refugees that fled the genocide after 1994 and do not feel safe returning to the country. And the government of Rwanda has spent decades going after some of these refugees. Some of these refugees are victims of suspicious death, assassinations, abductions in places like Nairobi, Dar es Salaam, Kampala. So the Rwandan problem is a problem that extends beyond its borders and extends to the countries in the region, and there's an appeal and a call for solidarity to uplift the voices of Rwandans who cannot be heard and who are drowned by the government's propaganda and its extensive public relations, PR, digital campaigns, flooding the internet with these images that make the country like an idyllic Singapore of Africa. But so it's important, and my message here is let's not forget the Rwandans are still struggling for freedom, and that they are under an extremely authoritarian regime whose level of control is unmatched in the region. I want to remind people that Rwandan citizens are subject to political indoctrination, which is something that does not exist in the other countries, but it is a reality in Rwanda. So with that, I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kida, for all of these insights. And now, last, definitely not least, we have Mr. Warren for his rules. Yep, it should be recorded.
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to be on this panel with distinguished panelists. My name is Chagulanyi Senta. My real name is Chagulanyi Senta Robert. I always keep complaining that my musical stage name slowly but surely overtook my real name. However, I'm consoled because it's much easier to pronounce. So please call me Bobby. I strongly believe that I shouldn't be the one here, especially if in the room we have my extraordinarily strong wife, Barbara Chagulanyi, who I believe is one of the strongest women that I know. And in addition to that, in the house we have my sister Agatha Atreide. She's a lawyer and activist, and she has gone through so much that I believe not so many can stand. However, since today I'm the one invited and I'm the one having a necktie in my neck, I believe I represent them. I've listened to the panelists. However, I strongly believe that if it's to talk about repression, if it's to talk about gross human rights violations, if it's to talk about cross-border repression, if it's to talk about dictatorship, then Uganda should be the country to come first. Uganda is a country of close to 50 million people under the firm grip of General MUSEVENI for 40 years and counting. He took power by barrel of the gun in 1986, and up to now, he's still in charge of our country. He is famously quoted to have said the problem with Uganda in particular and Africa in general are the leaders that overstay in power. But now it's a very big crime to remind him of what he said when he was my age. I am here not an invitation, not voluntarily. I'm here because I ran away, I escaped from my country. On January 15th, we had a presidential election, which I strongly believe we won. I was the main challenger of General MUSEVENI. We had an election where the internet was switched off 2 days to the election, and it remained off for the week. We had an election where immediately after I cast my vote, I was put under house arrest with my wife. But before that, days before, many dozens of our party officials were rounded up and detained. My 2 deputy presidents, who are women, were abducted a day before the election, and they remained missing for 2 weeks. When they resurfaced, they told an ordeal of being detained in a military barracks supervised by General MUSEVENI's son, OTEGEDDE, who is actually the Chief of Defense Forces in Uganda. Many people were abducted, they've not been seen again. My deputy president for the Buganda region, the most populous region, had his house raided by the military. See, women play a big role in our elections. They are the organizers. And when somebody is running, we tend to have our KATI centers where when we collect the declaration of result forms. The women tend to play the most important role of compiling the results. Now the military raided the house of Honorable Mwanga Chibondi and shot into the house, killing 10 people in his house, 8 of which were women. Now, I'm only talking about the ones that are known, but as we speak, thousands of our supporters are in jails. The difference between 2026 and 2021, because I ran in 2021 as well, is that in 2021, there was still a semblance of cover-up. However, in 2026, because the son of the president, who also doubles as the chief of defense forces, the army commander, does not pretend to be a good dictator. He will kill people and he will take pride in it. He will post on social media about it. He was proud to post that I have killed 24 of National Unity Platform, which is the political party I lead. I've killed 24 of NUP members, and I'm so willing, I'm looking forward to kill the 25th, which I want to be Bobby. Now Bobby is me. He ordered for my execution, and indeed my house was raided on the 16th of January, and I was lucky because we had gotten some good lessons in 2026. I played James Bond and his police from my house. Yeah, it would be funny if it was inside. You know, I left my house a few days later. My house was raided again because my wife remained under house arrest. This time, the soldiers broke into my house, only men. They beat up my wife so bad and my other family members, they stripped her naked. Meanwhile, they were filming. And like I said, the son of the president, who also is the commander of the military, takes pride in torture, especially torturing vulnerable people like women. He was proud to post the image of my wife subdued on the floor with soldiers with guns. And they said, yeah, this is the picture when he captured Kabobi's wife, and she was forced to tell us where the husband was. I remained on the run. I mean, so much of that. It is not only happening with my wife. He abducted my bodyguard and long-term friend Eddie. We looked for him for 2 weeks. We complained everywhere until in the middle of the night he tweeted and said, don't look for him. I'm holding him in my basement and I'm teaching him Munyankole. Now, Munyankole is the language of the tribe where General MUSEVENI comes from. And indeed, when Eddie showed up, he was all shaved, beaten, but unfortunately, when he was taken to court, he was not given a chance to go to the ICU in hospital. He was thrown in jail, and he's still in jail. Now, these stories have gone on and on and on and on and on. The repression, the abuse of human rights in Uganda is worse and worse and worse as it keeps going. When people talk about the same, I understand when you talk about Tanzania, in Kenya, but like Trevor Noah one time joked, said in Uganda, it is worse. What makes it even worse is that those that we look up to are not looking for accountability. I like that Otieno talked about it. It is not accountability and justice that is looked for, but political settlements. No wonder so many political players are silenced or compromised. We have what is supposed to be the highest moral body, the Interreligious Council. Now, the Interreligious Council comprises of religious leaders, leaders of all the religious sects that come together in what is supposed to be a moral body. They went to my house when I was being looked for, when the son of the president was tweeting every day, giving me 48 hours to show up or he will find me and kill me, ordering soldiers to look for me everywhere and kill me. Again, my wife and family was under house arrest. They did not have food because nobody was allowed to go in my house or come out of my house. But when the Interreligious Council went to my house, what they were asking my wife to do, number one, there were two things. First is to warn me not to destabilize the country. And two, asking whether I'm willing to sit down with General MUSEVENI. And I've said it many times, that we are not disagreeable to dialogue, but not transactional dialogue. And also reasserting ourselves that it's only free people that negotiate. And our action and what works for our country and individual. Now this has also been a big problem to us. We find ourselves in the United States and not in any country in Africa. Why? Because we believe that it is countries like the United States that wield power and influence over authoritarians like General Museveni. We are aware that for a long time the United States was giving up to $1 billion annually to Uganda in security cooperation. So we have always been requesting not just the United States but other developing partners like the EU and the UK, that this aid should be conditioned to values that we all profess: democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. Unfortunately, it has many times played up as if the US and other developing partners are only interested in diplomacy and not democracy. And that we believe that the more we and you friends echo that desire, that is what's going to work. Many times the US seems to be persuaded by security cooperation, but not democracy, not the promotion of human rights, which is very disturbing in our case. Now, Professor mentioned it in the case of Tanzania, that in Tanzania, the citizens look at the government like a parent. I wish we could look at the government like a parent, but for us, the government in Uganda is looked at, in fact, the president is looked at as a king, and we are subjects. And the son of the president plays it right because he's not shy to go on social media and say, well, I cannot wait for Mzee to step aside so I can take my inheritance. For clarity, I would request some of you, and I think I'm promoting you, please go and follow Muhoozi and Nkusaba on Twitter. That will help us, to speak less, because he helps us. He puts everything, and whatever he tweets, we believe it is in many ways their dinner table talk. Now, talking about trans-border repression, transnational repression. In the yesteryears, when people were struggling for freedom and for democracy, particularly in Uganda, they would run to Kenya, they would run to Tanzania. But when I was running out of my country, I could not board a plane in Kenya. I could not board a plane in Tanzania. I had to run as far as 3-4 countries away because General Museveni is more like the godfather of the region. Dr. GW'ABAKITAFFE, the guy who mentored us and a veteran freedom fighter and political activist and opposition leader, was picked from Kenya. He was abducted from Kenya by the Ugandan security. He was driven across the border in a car trunk and only showed up in Uganda in a military court. This has happened many times. My sister Agatha is here. My brother from Kenya, Boniface Mangi, faced the same plight when they went to stand with our brother Tembolisu in Tanzania. This goes on and on and on and on. What I feel is causing this is the inaction and perceived complacency by those that are supposed to be moral big brothers. Kenya used to be safe. Tanzania used to be safe. I want to believe that because the leaders there seemed to expect repercussions when they abuse rights. But General Museveni in Uganda has emboldened all other leaders to abuse rights with impunity because they see him get away with it. This is a guy that has been in power for 40 years. This is a guy that massacres citizens with reckless abandon. This is a guy who has a son that will threaten even other countries. When he threatened to invade Kenya and capture its capital in 1 week, the father, who is the president of Uganda, came out and publicly apologized to Kenya. But the following day, promoted the son. When the son tweeted an image of a tortured political activist The following day, he was made the commander of the military in Uganda. So impunity, injustice, and gross human rights violation and crime is rewarded in Uganda, and Uganda gets away with it. I want you to imagine a situation where the Chief of Defense Forces tweets having killed 24 political opponents, and tweets that he orders his military publicly to look for the presidential candidate that is challenging his father and bring his testicles. I apologize for my crude language, but he tweeted and ordered that my testicles should be delivered to him. Interestingly, the following day, he was standing shoulder to shoulder with diplomats, having dinner with ambassadors of democracies. So this, in many ways, is a slap in the faces of those that talk about human rights, that talk about democracy. And it speaks to the silent acceptance of this. So I want to say this, that maybe this impunity wouldn't be happening. Maybe this dictatorship wouldn't be accepted. And maybe these authoritarian leaders would not be behaving like this. But because their actions are seemingly acceptable by the inaction and by the blind eye that is given to them, then it keeps growing. Now, abductions are the order of the day in Tanzania, they are the order of the day in Kenya. Don't be shocked when they are the order of the day in other countries. I could have gone on and on and on and on, but maybe I'll stop here. And I like to make my conversations interactive. I apologize, I'm still healing from that recent trauma. I tend to pinch myself to make sure I wake up from the ordeal and confirm that I'm surely out of Uganda, because I had to escape from my own country. Many of my friends that are perceived and thought to have helped me, some of them, I'm told, have been shot and killed. When I was nominated to run for president, the Electoral Commission gave me 16 police officers to man my security, like they did with all other presidential candidates. Interestingly, after my exit from the country, all of them were rounded up and detained. I'm told that 9 of them were dismissed from the police with disgrace. They are being accused of aiding me to exit the country, while others are still in detention. So much has gone on. Many political activists are still detained. Many of our comrades are still detained. But I hear that they are suggesting to have negotiations with the government to allow me to return to my country and to allow the political party I lead to be recognized as a legitimate political party. So I wonder what they nominated to run for president. I could go, like I said, I could go on and on and on, but maybe I'll take the questions. I thank you very much for listening to me, and I thank you, fellow panelists. Thank you very much.
So thank you for coming. We're now going to open the questions to the audience. We are at time, so if people have to leave at 7, we completely understand. But also, if you are willing and able to stay for the Q&A round, you're more than welcome to do so. What I would ask is that you come and line up on this side, because if you are in the crowd, the panelists online can unfortunately not hear you unless you have a mic. So I have a handheld one right here, and so I will be holding it over there, and then our panelists will answer questions. So if you have anything to ask, please come and stand up in there and join me on this side. better that we just ask all the questions at once and then answer them? Yeah, okay.
Hello, my name is Owen. My question is a general question. How does civil society get back on track when it's being attacked? And it seems that it doesn't have much of a chance to recover when these working leaders are attacking it. It's very important to the preservation of democracy, and so I'm curious how we see it staying in shape and recovering even for attacks.
All right, John Lema, and my question is just to two panelists. I already shared that with Professor Elizabeth about human rights. So I need to know from them, because from all that has been happening in Uganda, none of them came out and stood with Uganda, pronounced it, all the atrocities that are happening. And then secondly, when we say we are standing for Ugandans, and we heard from their talk right now, it's not about Uganda, just like the president said. It's about Kenya, Rwanda, Ethiopia. But right now, it's about Uganda. And that's the reason we're here. But they haven't mentioned anything concrete about Uganda. Do they stand for that? Or they have their agendas? Because human rights is supposed to be standing. Because what I told Professor Elizabeth, our own chairperson came out and said it's above my what? Limit. Because I can't handle this, they threatened my life. So I'm not going to speak. The only person I know that spoke about human rights in Uganda, and I know the president knows, he was called Tom Buruku the late. He used to live actually right next to you, Water Flats, the white flats. So he came out and told the president, I am not going to stand with you. So I'm asking all these representatives, what are they doing? Because all they do is pretense. We are tired of pretense. So I will need to listen to what they say. Thank you.
My name is Christine Mutale. I'm here to stand on Uganda. When I was young, we had a lot of refugees from Sudan, from Rwanda. I was a girl guide. We never had anything to do with the human resource management, which has brought us here. But Uganda, I mean, people, I should call it people, including ambassador, as a whole, have denied the suffering of Uganda. I remember when this thing happened, I called somebody here who is very important. And I said, our people are being killed, please, please, please. I said, that lady from Uganda, every day she calls here until I stopped. Human, whatever it is. Up to today, as he said, nobody talks about our people who have been killed in Uganda. Nothing. They have allowed Museveni to play game on all heads of states in the whole world. This business of sanctions won't help. Even during Amini's time, he did it. They have their money. In fact, they have allowed Chinese to give Uganda quick money than through World Bank and IMF. We have been there with some other people here complaining. There's nothing that has been done. But this time, don't allow that man to play a game on you. He has made the whole world to be useless. Sorry to say so.
Your question.
Okay, yes. Hi, my name is Janelle Jim. I'm a senior here in the Elliott School of International Affairs. For my question, election, the one common thread that I noticed among all the speakers today was the concern of securitization of media within the region, and the securitization of media being used as a justification for digital authoritarianism. As Mr. Wine mentioned earlier, the use of media to almost put out warrants out for people through, Twitter, other forms of social media, and also media suppression as well. So, and how this framing of the media right now is being framed for countries outside of, after viewing a lot of the concerns that you have all brought up right now as being for security purposes, it's not being human rights violations. So my question is going towards how can this framing be reversed so that we can see, so that we can see, the global community come and stand up against the securitization and these human rights abuses. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mary Abdul. I'm an advocate from South Sudan. I have a couple of questions to the President of the world. The first one should be like, how do you envision the upcoming election should look like in Uganda and Africa, as you are someone who went through these challenges? And then secondly, what do you think they use the young people, the message that you understand, especially Ugandan youth when we work together? I think most of the African youth, they get used to what activities was used through talent, and they have a lot of talent. So how can they break these barriers? And I wanted to go further than that also, the role of the diaspora. How can the diaspora help in these transformations of democracy in Uganda? And also my last point, like you went through all these challenges, what gives you hope? Thank you.
I love the last part of the beginning, but it's a very positive point. Go ahead.
All right, my name is God Bless. My question is directed to Bobby Wine. So I've heard about you before today, and someone spoke to me about your comment, and I was asked a question. I said I really don't know much about you other than the fact that you were strong. But Mr. Bobby, what is your political, economic ideology? Say you become president in Uganda today, what will change? What sort of economy would you build for Ugandans that would, bring prosperity beyond what is currently happening? Because I can tell you this, that as much as many diasporans want to support people like you, and the international community that you rightly called out, if they cannot see their interest in your ideology, both economically, it is going to be difficult to really back you all the way. So, are you a capitalist? Are you a socialist? What are you, beyond the fact that you want political power? I think a lot of us in the diaspora, we've gone past let's just struggle for power, but what are we going to do so that we are not just repeating the same mistakes like those who just wanted power, like the people you're talking about?
Thank you so much for having us here today.
Yeah, I think also these two gentlemen, we're going to count the questions for now because we have quite a list. So go ahead.
My name is Daniel Kauma from Uganda. And my question is going to our former State Department experts. And just to borrow your experience, I think we are noticing that foreign policy is changing across the world. It's becoming very transactional. And that puts oppositions like ours in Uganda at a disadvantage. When current regimes can get away with atrocities, if I can offer you minerals, if I can offer you access to oil, if you can accept admitting deported migrants, and so forth and so forth. So I think the challenge is how do we work around the current system? It's not an easy question, where we see foreign policies becoming very commodified and transactional, where if you're speaking about human rights, few people are listening to you now. They are listening to who is getting them access to resources, minerals, We are seeing it in Venezuela and other countries as well. So how do we work around such a system to advocate for those who are voiceless? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ross,
Thank you very much. My name is GW'ABAKITAFFE. My question will be the last gentleman who went back. Because at this time I don't think Uganda will be looking for any economic. There are a lot of people who not killed day and night.
I'll answer the question. Please ask your question. I'll give the answer.
Really, that's what makes me start up.
Ah,
So,
all right, I'll give the answer.
Was talking about people that alleged have been tortured in Tanzania, and I am here, I am one of them. So I just came so that people see we did not allege. I still live that. My feet have never healed because of the torture. And we filed a case in the East African Court of Justice. We filed a case everywhere. And the international community let us down. You know, good for me is I do not expect so much in the international community. I expect so much in the people of Uganda. So I don't have a sense of entitlement on the international community to help us. I just also hope that you stop pretending that you are going to help when there's no help. And I'm sorry for saying you. I'm not meaning people here, but I'm saying that that's how the international community looks like. If what we said about Tanzania had been taken into consideration, because we came out after the torture, after being threatened that if we speak, we will be killed, and we said we're going to speak so that it stops with us. That's what we at least expected, at the very least. If that had been considered, 10,000 people wouldn't have been massacred in Tanzania. But it wasn't. So I am here so that you see that I am the one living that right now, and I am still living it. Thank you.
all right. Very loaded list of questions if you want to go ahead and start answering them.
Sure, thank you very much. The first question was, what would we want the international community to do? And I'm very glad my sister Agatha answered it. We are not asking you to come and save us. We are asking you to stop funding our operation. It is the American taxpayer that gives Museveni those millions of dollars. We are willing, and indeed we are trying to fight against oppression, but we cannot fight against $1 billion every year. We cannot fight against the French guns, against the tear gas that comes from the Europe and all that, you know. We want to free ourselves, but we are fighting against a power that is behind a dictator. In the late 80s, it is until the United States denounced the apartheid government that apartheid failed. Otherwise, even Nelson Mandela was declared a terrorist by Margaret Thatcher. So, the dictators in Africa would not be surviving if they are not being supported by the West. Idi Amin was supported by the West until the West got his hands off him. The same was with Gaddafi and others. So, we are asking the international community to stop, first, three things: stop funding the oppressors. Or at least, if you are to have cooperation with African countries, particularly with Uganda, at least put conditions on that aid. Conditions like respect for democracy, respect for human rights, and respect for the rule of law. I think that is not too much to ask for. We are always mocked by the propagandists of the dictators back home. Every time we come here, we don't come here to ask for money. When they are being funded by the Western countries, they call it cooperation. When we come to the Western countries to demand that conditions are put on that aid, they call us Western puppets. So we are asking they should stop funding our operation And they should use their moral tools that they have. Tools like sanctions, tools like the global Magnitsky. And also to disassociate. I've not seen an American president standing shoulder to shoulder with the European dictator Lukashenko. What Museveni does in Uganda, if it was a European president that does it to European people, I am sure that leader would not be in power the following week. Then why is the standard of human rights in Africa put at a lower standard? For lack of a better word, that is racism. So let the standard of democracy in Africa, let the standard of democracy, the standard of human rights in Africa be measured at the same standard with Europe. That is not too much to ask for. Somebody asked me, how can civil society be enabled to function? I wish my sister Agatha would help me answer that, because she's more vast in that area. Maybe at the end, I will humbly request her to help me answer that question. And how can the media be framed better to focus on human rights abuse? That's a very good question. The media, in many ways, and I'll talk in the case of Uganda, the media is owned. Almost all radio stations are owned by either a minister or an army general or somebody well positioned. And even those that are not owned are intimidated. We have a radio called the Central Broadcasting Service. It is owned by my kingdom. But I cannot be posted on that radio because Museveni threatened them. In 2009, he took away their license, and they spent more than 15 years operating without a license. So that means that even those radio stations and TV stations are controlled and guarded and intimidated. Thanks to the generation that we live in, we have social media. And it is social media that is helping us. No wonder Facebook is now banned in Uganda. Under the hate of Facebook, you know, in Uganda, like nowhere in the world, they introduced social media tax. Have you heard about social media tax? Well, it was introduced in Uganda. So we survive on the internet. We, for lack of a better word, smuggle the truth out of Uganda using social media. And because it's a creative generation, we tend to, you know, find other creative ways. How can youth play a better role? Get involved. Fold your sleeves and get involved. This that we are doing for the generation to come, because we don't know how long we are going to live. We have seen anybody, especially in Uganda, who tries to stand up to a dictator ends up either in exile or in prison or dead. But we do it nevertheless, because we know that what we do inspires others. You take out one, others rise. You take out basically Bobby Wine rises. You send Bobby Wine to exile, others rise. So pick a leaf, young people, and do what you have to do. After all, it is your future. I mean, yesterday I was a young man. Now I'm 44. I was a baby when Museveni came. I was 4 years. Now I'm almost a grandfather. So it is the youth that own the future. And to those in the diaspora, you have nothing like an excuse. You are safe. You are in safe government. All nations that have been liberated, their diasporas have played a very, very fundamental role. So get involved. Again, the same young man asked, what gives you hope? What gives me hope? History. History teaches us, yes, the young lady. Thank you. History teaches us that oppressed people have never and can never be oppressed forever. Hitler was powerful, but he fell. Stalin was powerful, but he fell. Museveni is powerful, but he will fall. So that alone keeps us going knowing that history is on our side, knowing that what we are doing is right. The fact that we have been arrested many times, Dr. Kiza Besigye, I think he's the most arrested person that I know, but he has never been convicted because the law is on his side. The law is on our side. And those of us who believe in God, we know God is on our side. And when God is on your side, my friend, nothing can stop you. So that alone gives us hope and keeps us going and going and going and going. Now there's some intellectual young man who asks, what is your economic, political ideology? I think, to me it sounded so elitist, maybe because I'm not so educated. But again, our mentor, Dr. Besigye, has mentioned it many times, that the intellectuals are the problem of our generation. I'm a freedom fighter, I just want to be free to choose. It is like asking a slave, what do you want to do with your freedom? Do you want to use it to go to New York? Or to go to, I just want to be free. I want to be free to choose. Now what if I'm a capitalist? Does that mean I don't deserve freedom? What if I'm a socialist? Does that mean I'm not supposed to get freedom? I thought freedom is the right to choose among options. As of now, we want the freedom to be citizens in our country. We want the freedom to have a vote. We don't have a vote in Uganda. We want the right to choose whether to be capitalist or socialist or none of the above. We don't have to explain, I don't have to explain to you whether I'm socialist or capitalist in order to be allowed to be free. So all we want is to be free. Yeah, I think that was all. May I ask my sister Agatha to please answer the question of civil society, because she's the expert on that. Thank you.
Before you start this, Agatha, I'm just going to say that because we were about half an hour over time, we're going to hard stop it at 7:30. So after you answer any questions,
It's just a simple question. I think it was about civil society, what it should do or can do. Civil society in Uganda is not allowed to do anything. 2 months ago, in January, 10 civil society organizations, including the one I work with, were suspended by the government because they did not want us to document anything regarding the elections, not the violations, nothing. That was followed by the freezing of the accounts.
Keep recording straight. She said this was shot 8 times, 16 times.
Were thrown in jail.
Can I ask to put that record straight?
Some of us had
Tundulis,
covered the
she said Tundulis was shot 8 times. It was 16 times.
I mean, space in Uganda has been shrinking very, very gradually in the last 6 years, especially financially. They started by sending out the Democratic Governance Fund, the European fund that was funding civil society in Uganda, and I think that was in 2021, because President Museveni, anyone that writes the law that the government is doing is viewed as subversive, so they told the DGO was funding and just it on the Recently, everyone that was funding civil society organizations that are political, especially those in the civil liberties space, was threatened by President Museveni's son with deportation. In fact, two diplomats were deported in the run-up to the elections. One, a German from GIZ, another from GWE. So that's what it has been. It's worse now. When they speak about President Museveni's son, I don't think Mr. Wine, like you guys call him, I do not think he explained enough that he's the one in charge. He's the one calling the shots now. So what happened was, I think some of the atrocities that Bobby mentioned here didn't include the atrocities out of Uganda. There's a UN report about the atrocities of the UPDF, the Ugandan army in South Sudan. In DRC, they were forced, I think, to go out. So that's what's happening. And when it comes to us that are operating within that context, you will just remain with a few that have stood firm and said whatever comes, NDOWOZA. And I don't blame those that have said this is not worth it. I almost died in Tanzania and I spent 3 months or 4 wondering if it is worth it, struggling to continue this fight, wondering if it's worth to leave my children there because no one is helping, not our governments, not neighbors, not the international community or the international world order. We have the UN, we have ICC, we have everything, but it's not coming to us. So I understand why some civil society organizations right now as I speak are trying to negotiate with the government to beg them to reopen. And so that means that they will do whatever the government wants them to do or whatever the government doesn't want them to do. I think summarily that's all I can say. Thank you.
I was going to say we're going to take the last question that was addressed to you both, and you can go ahead and answer that. And then after this, we're going to call it because we have reached our 7:30. So you can go ahead and answer the question.
Thank you, and I really want to say for Ms. Agatha, who just spoke, I had not recognized you in the audience, but your story is incredibly profound, and your courage is so notable. And when we speak about things like what is media doing, I would encourage people to look at BBC's documentary of her experience, her incredibly powerful testimony. Really, it's a great honor to have you here, and I appreciate everything you've done to speak out. And when I think about what do we do in the face of transactional situations, first let me clarify, I don't work for the U.S. government anymore, and so this is official. But I think this is not the first time that we have seen surges in policy that have been focused on transactional issues. And it makes the documentation and discussion that much more important. Over time, you can see that there are threads that we recognize because they've been saved, because people's experiences have been documented. So the courage that you showed to speak with BBC, the courage in your documentary with National Geographic, I think this documentation effort is tremendously important. I think speaking up more broadly on social media is also very important, and I take Evan's point that we have to think about how do we capture what's happening in social media, which can disappear so very quickly, so that we have a record to build upon for the future. That brings me a bit to what gives me hope. I am so inspired by your work. Your work gives me hope because I can imagine the pressure to be quiet. I can't imagine, I cannot imagine the pressure to be quiet. So your willingness to be here to share your stories, to help all of the rest of the world remember the dignity and humanity of every person, the right of every person to contribute to their government, to have an accountable government, to be respected in their humanness. I really take inspiration from you. So thank you.
People start rushing down really quickly. I just want to thank all of our panelists and our guest speakers for coming, for sharing their insights, all of their perspective, and for telling us a little bit about their personal experiences in the case of Mr. Wine, as well as their perspective on various really salient issues. So again, a big thank you and a big round of applause for everybody.